In the fabled land of Northern California, nestled in the Valley of Sacramento, two friends begin a journey to enlighten the world about their experience living life as a Xennial. But what is a Xennial, you may ask? If you wish to know, then follow them on their adventures.
Welcome to the Xennial Chronicles. This is James.
This is Mike.
And today, I'm not sure exactly what we'll be talking about today. We have a few newsworthy topics that we can bring up and talk about.
Sure.
We can touch on the recent spate of shootings, I guess, to at least a minimum degree. There's just been a lot of them, I know. There was a recent one just like today, right before we started.
There was one this morning. There was not to start on such a somber note.
It's what's happening.
No, there was the one this morning was three people were shot in a Walmart parking lot in Oklahoma.
Okay.
I think. Another one was there was a shooting in Fresno.
Last night or this week? It was this
last
weekend.
night. There was a shooting in Fresno last night.
But that might be gang related from what I understand.
There is zero information when it comes to that. You look at it and it seems to be like a targeted thing. It was a couple of people, two suspects apparently, so it was more than one person.
So when you say a targeted thing, this is more of maybe an issue or a beef between people and
possibly
resolving it that way.
Well, I don't know if it's some people could say that it may. The reason why it almost seems somewhat gang related is because of the formula. Basically, what it was it was a backyard football party that was shot up. And I think there were like 10 injuries and 6 deaths. I think all of them were male. There were no women or children harmed.
Okay,
which
that leads you more.
But
to
that
believe
also sounds quite precise.
Well, that leads you more to believe that this was a.
It sounds targeted to me.
Yeah, targeted, a settling of an issue between people, as opposed to what was being referred to in media stuff as like the mass shootings, the things like what would have happened in that Walmart parking lot, somebody just going to a public place and opening fire on people.
And then there was the one.
There was a school one. There was a school one.
There was a kid who there has been a total of 3 deaths in that. There were 6 people shot. 3 of them have died. That includes the shooter. So
police
that was
or himself.
Himself.
He did himself?
Before the police even got there, the police showed up and there were just people laying around. It was he opened fire at like 7:30 in the morning in the quad. As a matter of fact, like from what I gather from all the information the kid had, there is no way to tell exactly what problems there were, but you do know that the kid had training because it was a semi-automatic handgun that was the piece. It jammed when he started. He was able to unjam it and continue to open fire within 16 seconds.
So at least he had an understanding
training
of the weapon.
And his father was. So his father is no longer around. There's just like when you look at these little bitty details, like you think of the possibility where things could have gone. However, the kid was an athlete. He was popular. He had a girlfriend, and it was his 16th birthday. So there are some very strange coincidences that tend to happen around this stuff, and I don't know if any of it correlates, but you can't get an answer. Like there's no way to get an answer.
And just to add into that, it's not surprising necessarily to me. There are many people who would be surprised that somebody that's popular, an athlete, would do something like this, would do a school shooting. Mm-hmm. But I remember when the Columbine shooting happened, and one of the original things that they tried to do in the media was portray the 2 shooters in the Columbine thing. I can't remember their names exactly. But Dylan something.
I know Dylan Klebold was one.
Yeah, and the other one I can't remember.
And it's.
But they tried to be portrayed as the outcast kids that were made fun of and were into heavy metal and like Marilyn Manson was the big thing.
And he was.
And in fact. The truth.
I remember he got Eminem's support on that too.
Yeah. Well, the truth that came out later about them was they were actually 2 of the school bullies that were going around regularly bullying people. You didn't know this?
I did not know that.
They weren't the bullied people. They were actually the bullies.
I did not know that.
And this was just a further aggression of their bullying. This was
Whoa.
not a response to being bullied. This was further aggression on their part.
Didn't they break into one of their grandfather's woodsheds or something like that?
That may have happened. I know that their goal was to try to get as many people in the cafeteria as possible because they had set up bombs in the cafeteria to try to blow up. They were trying for the biggest body count possible. These guys, they were before the event of Columbine actually happened. They were attacking people verbally and physically at the school already because they were bullies. They were not. They weren't just the shy kids that were getting made fun of. No, these guys were being the one making fun of people, intimidating people already.
Right.
And there's sometimes this
strangely
narrative
outside of the purview of what you would consider most of these two.
The narrative is sometimes that the school shooters are people that have been maligned, or even shooters in general, people that have been maligned by society, that have been treated horribly, and so they're retaliating. That I'm not saying that is not what some of them might be, but that's not the entire profile for a shooter.
Right.
A mass shooter, a mass, whatever. It's not necessarily the only profile for it. There are people that seem to have completely normal lives, seem to be popular, doing great, seem to be in whatever positions that these things happen to. There's no just one indication that it's going to happen that way.
Yeah, there's those factors can be kind of all over the place. I mean, what can you say about it aside from the fact that it's a terrible situation?
It is.
Like,
I know that.
Okay, look, I take that back. There is a lot that people can say about it.
There's a lot.
There's obviously, because people argue until they're blue in the face.
Well, actually,
over these situations.
What's funny about what you're saying there is, if I remember correctly, when the one happened at 7:30 in the morning at that school.
Yeah.
At that same moment in time, in either the House or the Senate. I think the Senate, because the House is busy with other things. But there was actually discussion about gun control happening, and a gun control bill was basically, sorry to use this phrase, but shot down at that moment, or within the same moment as
around the same time
that this shooting actually happened.
Whoa.
Because that's the thing is this is a very polarizing thing when it comes to people's feelings about and thoughts about interpretation of the Constitution when it comes to guns, what guns are involved with. And now we're just saying here that this is part of conversation. We're not necessarily declaring our own personal views on this. We're keeping
that's what I'm trying to avoid personally.
Yeah.
Like I'd rather this is up to whoever listens to us to make up their own mind on the situation.
I think the one thing that anybody, at least I hope the one thing that anybody that listens to us can agree upon is none of us like to see children being shot. None of us want that to happen.
Absolutely
ever.
not.
And I firmly believe that even people who are pro gun control, people who are against gun control, neither one of those people want to see children shot.
I'm going to go farther and say
there's different, or even people shot.
Yeah, I'm going to go farther to say nobody wants to see any civilians being shot. There's no reason out in this area, out in this country, for people to open fire on other people unless it is legitimately in the name of self-defense, and that is another conversation.
Yeah.
That is a different conversation. However, you do not nobody wants. It doesn't matter who you are.
Yeah, it doesn't,
what your background is. What your
philosophy
behind.
It doesn't matter whether you've never
gun
owned a
safety
gun
or gun freedom or gun control or whatever the hell you want to call it. Nobody wants to hear that a bunch of people got shot up in a neighborhood.
Yeah, nobody wants.
They
don't
want to hear that happened at a school. They don't want to hear that.
Well, maybe psychopaths do, but the majority of people don't want to hear that these things have happened.
That's a legitimately good point. Yeah. That is, and as sad as that is a legitimate point. But that's all we're trying to talk about here. Again, we're not necessarily saying anything at all about. I am intentionally avoiding my own political views on the matter.
Yeah, we're not saying one or the other. We're just saying nobody. Again, the majority of people don't want to hear about, and not even don't want to hear about. They don't want people to be dying needlessly.
I will tell you this though,
guns.
And there are some people that may possibly be asking this question. If you're listening to this, well, if you don't want to put your viewpoint out on it, why are you having the conversation? Because the conversation needs to be had. This stuff needs to be reported. It needs to be talked about. And you can have your viewpoint and your opinion on the conversation, but being able to have the conversation is down to you and who you want to talk to about it and what kind of conversation you can have about it, whether or not it can, the discussion needs to be had for sure. However, mentioning that this stuff is happening is the most important part of it.
So that it's not completely glossed over and not
you
talked
don't
about.
want to ignore that it's happening. Ignoring that it's happening completely avoids you're completely sidestepping the problem.
Exactly.
Absolutely. And that is the most ignorant thing that you could do.
Well, and by not at least discussing it as we're trying to do here without putting our views on it, it's stopping, like you say, the discussion from happening. But the reason we don't necessarily want to put our views on it is because we want people from both sides of the conflict, because this is very much for the most part, people turn it into a black and white conversation.
Yeah.
I do believe that there's some gray area involved with
There is
a
large amount of gray area, personally.
But people turn this into a black and white conversation.
Yeah.
And I personally, I know I can speak for you in this, which I try not to, but this is a moment when I think I can. We want people from both sides, all sides of this situation, to be able to hear this, to hear that we're bringing at least the knowledge of nobody wants to see these bad things happen with people with guns. Nobody wants to see these people being killed. We can at least have that out there without coloring it with our personal views, so that all sides can listen, can hear the fact that this is something we do need to at least take a look at and keep in our public consciousness, and we're not turning one group away from listening to us by saying, oh, we believe this side, we agree with this side. If we want to have that conversation, we'll do it personally and with the people that we need to. Like you say, it's between you and that person you're having it with. This is open for anybody to be able to hear. Also, this podcast is for entertainment purposes for the most part.
For sure.
We do have some strong opinions. I know I express mine often pretty handily, but still, we want people to be able to access this, to listen to this, and just to maybe start the conversation within yourself, even, but with other people, without our views entirely tainting it, especially on such an issue that is so incendiary with people. It really is. This is one of those issues that I know coming up on the holidays, coming up on Thanksgiving, Thanksgiving will be a week after you guys hear this podcast. This is one of those things that if you want to have a pleasant Thanksgiving, you may want to avoid talking about at Thanksgiving dinner. If you don't want to have a pleasant Thanksgiving, go for it.
Right.
But,
for sure. I think at this point it goes without saying, we've kind of we've stirred the pot a little bit, I would say, just by saying something. If anybody wants to leave a comment on what your opinion is behind this stuff, I would say feel free, but also at the same time be respectful of other people.
Please.
If we're going to do anything about our comment thread, if we have the capability of doing so, and we do, we will be keeping an eye out. Do not hurl insults at people. Do not be disrespectful. Being able to share an opinion is something that's very important.
Yeah.
But it has nothing to do with being able to shoot insults at other people for having a different opinion than you.
Discuss the issue. Don't attack other people. If you really want to get to the heart of being able to discuss an issue, you can't attack the other person involved, because that just shuts them off from discussion.
Yeah, so feel free to leave a comment. If you have a viewpoint on this that you feel that you could share, that's great. Other people may disagree with you. They may mention it, which is fine. Don't hurl insults. Don't be disrespectful. That's not what this place is for. And we'll be keeping an eye out on our YouTube page and our Facebook pages where videos come out of this, and also any comment thread that we have for the podcast as well. Anything that shows up on our page, if it's disrespectful, we will be deleting it. So
definitely.
Yeah.
On to happier, newsworthy stuff.
Moving forward.
We did our football episode, our super long football episode.
Yeah.
You were there. You just didn't say much.
I didn't have much to say.
Yeah. I'm bringing forth some new football news.
What is that?
First one being that since the last podcast we did, the 49ers, our local team, our closest local team, and the team that we both are fans of.
Yes.
To some extent or other.
Yeah, I would say like I said, I will be open about it. I am a passing fan. I'm not a fair weather fan, let's say. I don't have the jerseys or anything like that.
That's good. I can say this much. Mike is definitely not the jumping on the bandwagon type.
Yeah.
So like now that we're having a good season, he's not suddenly wearing 49ers gear where he normally doesn't.
Yeah.
A funny thing is I'm not personally wearing any this year, but that's because of my own personal superstitions. I know that my superstitions mean absolutely nothing to the. I'm logical enough to realize they
I
mean
get it.
absolutely nothing to the success of the team, but it's in my brain, so I got to do it.
I understand.
It's what makes me feel okay,
Dude, that's part of the fun of it, man.
But as I'm showing Mike, because I know he's seen it before, I have the 49ers emblem literally tattooed on my body.
When did you get that? How long ago did you get that?
I got that almost 7 years ago.
Woo.
Yeah.
Wow. So you got that one. Oh my goodness.
I got that one. I got that one in
when
March of 2000.
You got that one when I finally got this one.
You finally got the pyrolosis
Yeah,
symbol?
I got this after I got my. Actually, it's been. I'll be working at my current retail job for. Oh, it's been 8 years now.
No, I
And
can
so
tell,
this
I can tell you
tattoo,
exactly.
this tattoo is 8 years old because I got it to commemorate the fact that I had moved forward with my life at that point.
Okay.
You know,
Now
it was a milestone type of a thing.
This one, the 49er tattoo, which is on my, what would
Oh,
be
wait
a
a minute.
bicep
No,
for most people.
I'm correcting myself.
Okay.
This is the one I got.
Your Zepp tattoo.
My Zeppelin tattoo on my forearm. Yeah,
Okay.
That's the one that I commemorated with.
Okay. No, this one happened in March of 2012. I know that for sure.
Cool.
And it's on my left arm where a person with actual muscles would have their bicep. It's just there on my somewhat skinny but still flabby, weak arm.
Understandable.
And it's on my left arm. On my right arm in the same spot, I have a Tinkerbell tattoo.
Nice.
So you've seen the Tinkerbell, haven't you?
I have seen the Tinkerbell.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the purpose of the Tinkerbell, you know what that is. For anybody who listens, some people know the purpose, some people don't. That'll remain a mystery.
Cool.
But
I thought you were going to say it.
No, the 49er one is the matching to the Tinkerbell one.
Oh, cool.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It just doesn't have it's not completed yet. It has things that'll need to be put in it
For sure.
eventually.
Cool.
Hopefully further in the future, but whenever it happens, it happens.
Yeah.
Anyway, so
I know somebody. If you don't already have you've got a few, so you probably got.
I've got some people, but I might be interested in the people that you know.
Yeah.
Anyway, 49ers. Back
Yes.
to the 49ers. They lost their first game of the season, so they are no longer undefeated. That was on last Monday night. They
Okay.
faced the Seattle Seahawks. I know you're not a big football fan. Again, we've just discussed that. You're passing, but I will say this much. If you're going to watch any game this season, other than if for some weird reason the Niners actually do make it to the Super Bowl, you might want to watch that. But if you're going to watch any game this season, watch the game that happened on Monday night. It is
Okay.
literally the craziest game I think I have ever seen in my life.
Really?
There was a fumble by Russell Wilson, the quarterback of the Seahawks, where he was being sacked. The ball squeezed out of his arms, right? It rolled down.
Popped right out.
Well, no. He's a right-handed quarterback, so he had it in his right hand.
Right.
It rolled on his left forearm into this elbow.
It came out sideways
and
like
then
that.
came out from his elbow into the hands of one of his offensive linemen,
Whoa.
who started to try to run with it because it's almost like he handed it to him with his elbow.
Cool.
The offensive lineman started trying to run with it. I believe it was DeForest Buckner, a defensive lineman from the Niners, reached in and stripped the ball from him. It bounced on the ground into DeForest Buckner's hands.
Whoa.
And DeForest Buckner ran it in for a touchdown.
Whoa.
It was one of the craziest plays I have ever seen in my life.
It
was insane.
That's interesting.
And then, of course, it ended up going into overtime.
Okay.
The Niners had to sign a rookie kicker to be their field goal kicker and their extra point kicker because their regular kicker, who they signed to a huge contract this offseason, injured his quad in practice.
Oh, that sucks.
So they signed this rookie kicker off the street. The guy's never been on an NFL team.
Right.
He kicked in college, but that's it. He was signed to an NFL team at the beginning of the year and then got cut when they cut down to 53-man roster before the year started.
Okay.
So he comes in, kicks great for the whole game, kicks a couple of field goals, including one that sends them into overtime. They get the ball back off an interception off the Seahawks in overtime.
Right.
Drive it down the field, get within field goal range. The guy goes to kick the game-winning field goal in overtime because the way overtime works is if you get the ball first, you score a touchdown, you win automatically.
Right.
If you get the ball first, you score a field goal. The other team gets a chance to score a field goal or to score a touchdown, and then after that point, whoever scores next wins.
Okay.
Each team has to possess the ball once unless a touchdown is scored.
Okay.
Okay. So Seahawks had it first in overtime. Niners got it on an interception. go to kick the field goal. He shanks it so bad it ends up in the tunnel. Just
Oh,
a terrible kick.
no.
Terrible kick. So the Seahawks get the ball back, drive it. Niners get the ball back, try to drive it, can't do anything. Seahawks get it again literally on the last second of the overtime because there's only one overtime period.
Yeah.
So once it's over,
Because it could end as a tie game.
yeah,
at
if
that
it's
point.
still tied, it's tied. Last second of overtime, the Seahawks kick the field goal and win the game. And they acted like it was a playoff game. They were just they were freaking out. But still, last second of overtime.
They beat like one of the only undefeated teams in the entire league.
The only undefeated team.
Oh, they were so there's
The Niners
zero
were
undefeated teams now.
At this point, no undefeated teams. So
They were the longest lasting undefeated team
at that
in the
point.
league at that point.
Yep.
Holy smokes.
So they lost the game, which in some ways it's okay because it was a hard fought game. They stayed in it.
Yeah.
They didn't just give up when they started getting beat up.
Yeah.
It's also okay because then you don't have to worry about it. Would have been a sucky season to go all the way to the Super Bowl undefeated.
Yeah.
I'd be like 18-0 going into the Super Bowl and then the season 18-1 by losing the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
By the way, I want to be the first one to say here, I would rather my team lose a playoff game than lose a Super Bowl again. We have lost one Super Bowl. I do not ever want to experience that again. Let's lose a playoff game. NFC Championship game, fine, lose it.
Yeah.
Any other playoff game, lose it. If we go to a Super Bowl, that's the one I want to win. I don't care about losing the other ones. Those are better. It sucks to lose a Super Bowl. It absolutely sucks. I feel for Bills fans. Reason I say that, in case you don't know, in the early 90s, the Bills went to 4 Super Bowls in a row, lost all 4 of them.
Oh, that sucks.
It's a feat that no other team has ever been able to do, 4 Super Bowls in a row, but they lost every single one of them.
Oh, man.
That's
a terrible record to have, like when you think about the longest string of second place.
Yeah, well, their quarterback ended up in the Hall of Fame as a result because he's a damn good quarterback. But still, no other team has been able to pull off the feat of 4 years in a row, but losing every time kind of sucks.
Yeah.
But anyway, point being, it was a loss. It sucked to be a loss, but it was a hell of a game.
Yeah.
Well, they played again yesterday against the Arizona Cardinals.
Okay.
Another hell of a game. Ended up winning. That was great.
Cool.
But that's not the real NFL news of the week.
Oh, really?
The real NFL news of the week came on Thursday. Oh, you didn't hear about this. I can tell by your furrowed brow.
No. What?
So the Browns played against the Steelers. Now, to have you understand, these are both AFC North teams.
Okay.
So that means they see each other twice a year.
You broke that down for me a little bit. Okay, continue.
They see each other twice a year, and they're division rivals. So that means there's always heated stuff. Like the Seahawks for the Niners are division rival. That's why it's such a heated game. The Cardinals, who they played yesterday, division rival, heated game.
Okay.
To go back to the Browns and Steelers, heated game. The Browns, who've been garbage all year, are actually winning the game, which they shouldn't be because the Steelers have been playing better.
Okay.
I believe the Browns are winning. Actually, it really doesn't matter. What ends up happening is...
Okay, so now I am still... Okay, I know just as much really as I did at the start of when you were talking about this. Well, please continue.
This is what needs to happen.
Let's go into the...
We're near the end of the game.
Okay.
Myles Garrett, who is the kind of standout defensive lineman from the Browns...
Right.
Goes in to sack Mason Rudolph. Mason Rudolph, the quarterback for the Steelers.
Okay.
The infamous quarterback who got knocked out on his feet, 6-8 weeks ago?
Oh, that guy. Yeah.
That guy.
Oh, damn, that was brutal.
That video I showed you.
Yes, I remember.
Tunk, I'm going to bed now.
Yeah, he was just out. He was out before he hit the ground.
He's back. He's playing. It's great. And it's funny that it happens, that what happens to this guy. Well, Myles Garrett goes in to sack him. Rudolph gets the ball off, thrown away before he gets sacked. But Garrett kind of brings him to the ground, which would be a penalty nowadays. All his weight lands on him. They have really weird ways they penalize defensive linemen now when they go to sack a quarterback.
Right.
While they're on the ground, Mason Rudolph starts kind of fighting with Myles Garrett, trying to pull Myles Garrett's helmet off, and like they're starting a tussle. They get up, and the tussle is continuing, and Myles Garrett ends up pulling off Mason Rudolph's helmet.
Okay.
At this point, and pushing him down. An offensive lineman at this point gets into Myles Garrett's face and starts pushing Myles Garrett away. Pushing him.
Oh, boy.
Mason Rudolph, unhappy with what's going on, starts charging back in, yelling and screaming at Myles Garrett.
Okay.
The offensive lineman is between them, pushing him away. And now, reminder, Mason Rudolph does not have a helmet. Mason Rudolph's helmet is in Myles Garrett's hand, which he then proceeds to swing at Mason Rudolph.
No, I knew that was coming.
Hit him in the head with it.
Oh, no.
Luckily, because I guess he's starting to become concussion-proof, he did not get a concussion from it, but this ended up with another melee of more people coming in, Myles Garrett being thrown to the ground, and another offensive lineman kicking Myles Garrett while he's on the ground.
This sounds like baseball in the 90s. What happened?
This was the most, and this is like near the end of the game. The game's already decided, and this happens.
Huge fight. Like, what happens? What kind of penalty goes to that? I mean, these guys are going to be fined out the butt.
$250,000 fine to each team.
Ouch.
Every player involved has been fined.
Okay.
The offensive lineman who kicked Myles Garrett has a 2 or 3 game suspension. Okay. Interestingly, and it's become the topic of conversation, Mason Rudolph has not received any suspension.
Okay.
Even though it is, by the looks of things, he kind of started the tussle by originally trying to remove Myles Garrett's helmet while Myles Garrett was on top of him on the ground.
Right.
And by then going back into the fray before he got hit in the head.
Uh-huh.
Those are things that he should technically get penalized for, not just fines but suspensions, because he was continuing it, but he's a quarterback, so they're feeling that he's not going to be getting the same punishments. Myles Garrett has been suspended indefinitely, which is the appropriate response to that. There is also the discussion because he actually physically attacked him with a weapon, being the helmet. There is discussion that there may be charges brought against him.
That's like serious.
That's assault
stuff.
Even though it's happening within a football field, he hit him with a weapon. That is assault.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, Garrett is indefinitely suspended at this point.
Lord.
I don't know the monetary fines that have been levied to each person, but this is like probably the biggest news in the NFL for the week. It was just such, to watch the video, and I'll show you the video later.
Yeah.
This is just a level of
this.
insanity and play. It's scary, crazy.
Dude, wow.
That's the football news for the week, and that literally as much as I would love to gush about the things that the Niners have or haven't done, whatever. I'd love to talk about the Niners because I know them. Dear God, this fight was just.
That's what takes precedence.
Really,
today.
It does because it's
this week rather.
It's making a difference on so many things. It's a hell of a thing. And again, the same guy. I find it amusing in my weird, sick, demented way that it's the same guy that got knocked out on his feet that gets hit in the head with a helmet. It's just like, dude, he's a backup quarterback. He's only in because the Steelers stalwart Ben Roethlisberger, who's been there, that's a name even you know.
Yep.
Ben Roethlisberger. He's been their quarterback for years, and he's played through all kinds of injuries. And this year, nearing the end of his career, he's injured and can't play. And this guy who's nobody really knew anything about him. I mean, he was decent enough in college to get drafted into the NFL, but he wasn't like that prolific in college. And this guy is now national spotlight because of getting knocked out on his feet and then not getting knocked out on his feet when you really would expect him to.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry. A helmet comes crashing down on your head.
Yeah.
You're expecting to get knocked out. He doesn't. He's still up and moving. Scary. Anyway, we're going to take a break now.
Oh, okay.
And when we come back, we're going to talk about the newest derogatory phrase.
Okay.
You know which one I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, because I almost completed it without thinking about it.
Yeah, you almost said it, huh? You almost said it.
Yeah, I love it.
We're going to talk about this, and it makes sense for us to talk about this. We are the Xennial Chronicles. The Xennial name is about generational things.
Yeah.
So who better to talk about this new insult? We'll be back in a minute.
Hey friends, this is Mike from the Xennial Chronicles reminding you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Xencron, spelled Xenchron, to keep up to date on all things TXC. And please check out our official website, theXennialChronicles.com, or if that's too much to type, Xencron.com. Thanks again for listening, and now, back to the show.
Welcome back, everybody.
Hey.
So, I said before the break we were going to talk about this new insult.
Yeah.
This generational insult.
Yeah.
What is it, Mike? I know you want to say it.
Okay, Boomer.
But I'm not, though.
You're not, but...
No.
I mean, you know what? Honestly, at this point, I think boomer is just a mindset.
I
If
think
you
it
say
is.
something that's dumb and old and completely disconnected from society, that's boomer.
So and I'm glad you explained it that way. Basically, what this has become, if people who are not familiar with this, first of all, if you're not familiar with this, are you not on the internet?
Right.
or if you're not familiar with this, okay, boomer.
Right.
That's- I mean,
No,
that's the
pretty
appropriate
much, yeah.
response.
The idea is if you pretty much, if you voice your opinion and your opinion sounds like you lived under a rock for the last 30 years, or let's say last
Well,
15.
I think this is. Let me see if I can work this a little better.
Mm-hmm.
What this is, obviously, this is millennials typically. Although some Gen Zs,
Actually, most of these are. This
They're
is a
Gen
Gen
Zs?
Z thing.
This is a Gen
This
Z
is a
thing,
Gen
but
Z
millennials are
thing
getting
that's
blamed
so
for it.
catchy that millennials. No, they're not getting blamed.
They're-
It's a Gen Z thing that's catching so much that millennials are starting to use it.
I'm
I
surprised-
use it. It's hilarious.
I'm surprised that Gen Zs aren't attacking Xers for it. Like, okay, Xer, maybe I just started.
You
that.
know, people have tried to do that and it doesn't quite
doesn't
work.
work. Okay, other people have tried. Damn,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't get to start it.
No, it doesn't have the same. It doesn't have the same effect. See, OK Boomer. The thing about OK Boomer is the reason why it's such a good insult. It's two words that literally brush off anything that anyone says that's just way disconnected from where society is going.
Yeah, well,
OK
and
Boomer
that's-
is an ultimate dismissal.
And that's what the way it's been hitting me is, as I've seen this, especially over the last 2 weeks or so, this has been the building thing for it, right?
It pretty much just started and caught on like maybe a couple weeks ago. It's
And-
not even a month old yet, and it is caught like wildfire, man.
There
I
are
love it.
there are places that are really trying to label this as hate speech, as bad as saying the N-word to people of African descent. I mean, seriously, this is the level this is coming
guess
to
who's
with
doing it? It's boomers that are saying that
exactly
stuff.
because and,
You know?
and it's
This
amusing.
this is way more effective than calling somebody Karen. You know what I mean?
Although, you know what I have found my experience has been?
Mm-hmm.
Karens don't know that they're Karens.
No.
They have no concept. So if you try to call somebody a Karen, they have no concept what you're talking about. Kyles, I have found, Kyles typically accept that they're Kyles and are proud of it,
Yeah.
which is kind of amusing. If you don't know what a Kyle or a Karen is, again, internet, please.
Yeah.
Do
You'll figure it out.
Do your research, or obviously you've never worked in customer service,
Right.
or tried to go to any place to have fun where alcohol is involved.
Right. Yeah,
One
pretty much.
One of those is for Karens. One of those is for Kyles. Figure out which one.
But yeah, like I don't know. There's so much that can be said about the phrase in such a short period of time, I feel.
Well, and I thinking about it, I have a large number of people that fall into the baby boomer generation. Within my life that I talk to on a regular basis, I'm involved in on a regular basis.
Yeah.
I don't know at what level you're at for that, but what I find interesting is the majority of them, with the exception of one or two like different-minded, outstanding individuals.
Yeah.
Like I'll call out my dad on this. He doesn't always listen to the podcast. I mean, he's proud of me as a son, but not proud enough to listen every time. Thanks, Dad. But I do know I have other family that listen to this, and I'll say that my dad is definitely one of the more open-minded people of the baby boom generation, and he's right in that generational grouping. He's one of the more open-minded people of that generation, and he can see how his experience in life was a completely different experience. I mean, I asked him, I think the other day about, he did go to college when he was out of high school. He did get an associate's degree at college. In fact, you're going to find this amusing. I know you know my dad to some extent. I believe he got a credential to be or he got set up. I don't think they needed credentials at that time. They just needed maybe an associate's degree because it's, back then. But he did some substitute teaching for a short time.
Oh.
Not very long. I mean, he may have only gone to 1 or 2 days of class, but he did do a substitute teaching stint. But he was working at a time, the main job he had was as a grocery clerk for the almost completely defunct now Lucky's supermarket.
Oh, wow, I remember Lucky's.
For those of you who don't remember Lucky's, it was basically just a supermarket. I think Save Mart in the California area, Northern California area, is who bought out all the Lucky's stores. So anywhere where you see a Save Mart, it probably used to be a Lucky's. So if you're a Z or a millennial listening to this, ask your local Xer or Boomer, and they'll be able to tell you about the Lucky's that they had.
Yep.
But he worked as a grocery clerk there, just scanning people's groceries, doing that type of stuff. When he started working there, and this is a job that required you to wear a shirt and a tie.
Yeah.
I mean, my dad always wore a tie to work. When he started there, he was making pretty decent money. He had a friend that was a PG&E linesman, so working on the power lines and fixing those kind of stuff. And when they both started working, they were making pretty close to equal money.
Okay.
And then the linesman started making more money and more money and more money. And my dad didn't necessarily with his profession. It just stayed stagnant. It stayed the same. And this goes to the mentality. My dad was able to see the shift in society where your living wages that people were making started getting outpaced by what things cost.
Yeah.
And started seeing the shift in this society where you can't just go out and get a normal regular job and be able to afford things like he was working as a grocery clerk and was able to afford mortgage payments on a house and to buy a house.
Yeah.
Buy two, technically. He bought one, sold it, started to buy another one. He was able to do that on a grocery clerk's salary. Where, and again, he saw how the world changed to where when it came time for his oldest kids to be adults, and even when it came time for me to be an adult, our world had shifted so much that normal job wasn't going to get you the ability to go out and buy a house. You needed something more than that. You needed to have a skill or a training or schooling to get you to that point where you had a better job to do it. And those things weren't, when he went to college, it was fairly inexpensive to go to college.
Yeah.
Didn't he said it cost a couple $100 for him to go and get his associate's degree. And he had help from his stepdad and his mom with his housing stuff, but he still had to work to help pay for, his normal things. But they could afford it on the wages that they were making, and it was so inexpensive for him to live that it could be afforded that way. The way that things have changed in society, the expectations of what people from the baby boomer generation have on how you can just walk up to a place and get a job. Go talk to the owner or the manager and they'll get you a job. You can't do that anymore. You have to go through so many different levels of applying to things. It's so impersonal now. You're not hired on the strength of your character. You're hired on what you fill out on this online thing.
Yeah.
I mean, when was the last time you've seen somebody get a paper application for things? I remember when I was trying to find work, it was maybe 8-9 years ago, I was trying to find work again because I had been out of work for a while. Luckily, I knew some people in Blockbuster and got a job back at Blockbuster. But all the other places I went to apply, I was going to places trying to get paper applications like I was taught to do by my boomer parents. Nobody had paper applications anymore.
No, it's pretty much all online. Yeah.
Everything was online.
You literally could apply for a job without leaving the house now.
But more importantly, one of the things that I was taught by these parents was the idea of being able to, like I said, go to the place that's hiring, talk to the manager. And you wanted to talk to the manager because you wanted to make sure to make that good impression with the manager. How to talk to the manager, the things that you say to them before you even did an application for any of that. Because what you wanted to do was get that job secured before you did that application. Make the application a formality.
Yeah, you want to make sure that it was the application at that point was, you wanted to make sure that you knew that if you were to go through the paperwork, you'd be getting in.
Yeah.
Like building a rapport was the first thing you used to do.
That world doesn't exist.
No. Now it's, okay, you're interested in a job. Okay, go ahead and do our online application, take our personality test. And if you pass the personality test, then
you'll be part of the pool of people that we will look into.
Then you'll come in for now people do mass interviews where they literally have multiple people compete for one or maybe a few positions if they're available at the same time. So the competition has increased and the payoff has decreased drastically when you're thinking about it.
And you can't, and that building of that personal relationship doesn't exist anymore.
No, it's still, it's very disconnected. Even like as much as you try to put out like how you are personable.
Yeah.
And like me, like I work in a retail environment, and
That's
you're right.
That's
like
that's almost all my work
Yeah.
has been in retail environments.
Yeah.
And I can sell you
aside
anything
from
I
getting
need
a
to.
hookup, like
Yeah.
I worked another retail job where I got a hookup through a former coworker of mine who moved on to that place.
Yeah.
And I got a hookup because I was able to tell, to have a one-on-one with them before I did the full online app.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, well, let's talk. And
Which only happens if you have an in somewhere.
yeah, that's the only time. If you're brand spanking new at this stuff, they don't know who you are, and the first thing they're going to have you do is take some type of a personality test, which I don't fully agree with those.
Well, and if you're, I mean,
That just literally means, okay, well, if you're in this situation, you can pass a personality test easily, but if you don't know how to say those things,
Yeah.
like depending on certain positions, certain jobs, they may require that you have zero experience. That's the ones that get me. Like, there are certain customer service jobs like bartenders or even some retail positions. Fast food. There's fast food personality tests now.
yeah.
Which is like, aren't you flipping burgers and like cooking fries? Like,
here's the thing: you can go and sit and take a personality test on a computer.
yeah,
That's great. What I want to see is actually how you respond.
Yeah,
when
how do you
somebody is
interact with a human being?
Well, when somebody is yelling and screaming at you because you didn't include you did include the pickles on their hamburger when they didn't want it.
Yeah.
Or from my personal experience, the wrong price tag is on the movie. And they
Yeah.
wanted that price instead of the price tag, instead of the actual price that it is, because the wrong price tag is
Right.
on the movie, and they are yelling and screaming at you, and you're just trying to find out what your store policy is so that you don't get in trouble trying to help this person out, and all
Yeah.
they want to do is yell and scream at you in the middle of your packed store,
Right.
and everybody's staring at you. How do you respond to that? Do you deal with the customer? Do you get angry with them? Do you break down and cry? What do you do?
Yeah, there's no personality test that on some online, like even on a sheet of paper. Like,
Yeah.
you can't fill in a bubble that says that you're going to react that way.
No, and you're not necessarily gonna know. You can't.
Right.
You can't get that from
That
the-
only gets you so far.
but it's what's being used, and that's the thing is, since the time that they were teenagers, the boomers were teenagers and young adults, this massive shift in the world has happened to a point where the way that they see the world as being, it's no longer that. The world's not their world anymore. It's
Right.
a different world.
Yeah, it
and
has moved
that's
on.
and that's where I think this really comes in is they're still trying to impose their values and their viewpoint on a generation that has one knowledge at an access level they never had.
right.
The information being available on a momentary notice, not having to wait for any of it like again you used to be able to do, but a world that has shifted in a way that is an alien thing to what the boomers were used to, and they many of them don't want to see that it's shifted. They can't understand or conceptualize the fact this is a whole different world than what they've experienced, and more so than I think. I'm sure this issue has happened many, many times in history in the past.
Yeah.
But again, as we've discussed how our microgeneration of the Xennials exists because of how much difference happened, how much change happened
Yeah.
in our formative years in our life. With the boomers, so they've been a part of that post-war change, post-World War II change in the world.
Yeah.
The economic boom of post-World War II.
Mm-hmm.
The technological boom that happened afterwards and continues to happen. This is something they haven't been able to fully wrap their minds around. They haven't been able to see so much changes happen. I would say more changes happened since the 1940s
Yeah.
in human history than probably happened for the previous 500 to 600 years in human history. So much change in the way that our day-to-day lives work.
Yeah.
And the boomers are one of the last generations to remember the old ways. To have been brought up in that old way of thinking, that old way of
They
having
are.
the world
Well,
happen.
I'm curious as far as what happens on. I'm curious what happens on the Gen X level as well, because Gen Xers, they're known for Their cynicism. Yeah.
Well,
they're known
and-
for
and
that.
Part of the reason, let me explain the reason to
Yeah.
you. What happened was in the post World War II United States
Mm-hmm.
specifically, because all we can really relate to in this conversation is what happened in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
What's happened in other countries, they had different responses to post World War II.
Right.
U.S. had a very interesting thing happen post World War II.
Okay.
In World War II, obviously, we had our men go out and fight on two different fronts. One in the Pacific, one in Europe. Okay.
Yeah.
As a result, a lot of women entered the workforce. This
Right.
was an interesting time in the sense that women were granted a little more freedom, a little more responsibility outside of the home than what they had been in U.S. society before that.
Right.
It's a very patriarchal society. Women mainly stayed at home, did their at-home things. They weren't in the company of men in what men did, in pursuits that men did. They were required to be as a result of the war. Too many men out as soldiers. Women had to do some of the factory work, some of the other stuff. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
This caused a psychological shift in how women viewed themselves. Men come
Yeah.
back from the war,
Expect things to be the same way that they were
and,
before.
and they're not.
Yeah.
So this causes a little bit of a psychological shift.
Right.
And in fact, some of the TV shows at the time help represent that. Don't think that Leave It to Beaver was just a show about some typical suburban American family.
Mm-hmm.
Part of that was the kind of idea of getting the woman back into her role as the homemaker and the man back into his role as the head of the household.
Wait, really? Like that was? You think that was the purpose was to bring that back? Because wasn't Leave It to Beaver like what years? That was like the 50s, wasn't it?
That would be post-war.
Yeah, you're right.
And I'm not going to say it was explicitly said that they were doing that.
No, but I understand that they're trying to.
There's so much psychological thing.
They're trying to reinstate the white picket fence family.
Yes,
you know what I mean. Yeah,
The subtext of things is usually far more interesting, and sometimes you really have to look into it and root out what the subtext is, because you have to think of what were the creators
yeah.
trying to say beyond what they were outwardly saying.
Okay,
I do
question.
find personally that a lot of millennials and Gen Z people see more of what's right there in front of them that like a piece of media, movie, TV show, whatever. They see what's right there, the main message that's being portrayed,
Right.
and often miss some of the subtle subtext issues,
Right.
because the way they consume things, they just consume what's right in front of their face. They don't always look deeper.
Right.
I think, interestingly enough, I think baby boomers do the exact same thing. I think your Gen Xers, part of their cynicism is the fact that they notice subtext, I think, a little bit better than the boomers and the millennials and the Gen Zs.
I actually no. You know what? I don't necessarily. I don't necessarily think that. First off, I have a question, and
Yes.
then I also have a response to what
Sorry,
you're talking about. The first question is, do you think that shows like the Andy Griffith Show and other shows may have tried to break those boundaries in any way? Like I Love Lucy broke the hell out of that, but that was
Not really.
wartime, wasn't it?
I Love Lucy didn't break it. How do you think I Love Lucy broke it? Who was in charge with I Love Lucy? Was it Lucy or was it Ricky? Lucy was the one always messing up, and Ricky was the one that had to clean it up after her.
No, well, maybe it was about the. I was thinking more along the lines of
Now,
who was
Lucy-
in charge of the actual.
Lucy was trying to be pioneering about it, but she hit roadblocks
she hit
every
hit
step
other
of the
things
way.
like
And more
she's
importantly,
hitting other stuff like because she was like loose. She was. You know what? I was thinking more of the politics behind the show rather than the show itself.
because Lucy was
but-
Lucy was key in the name being called I Love Lucy.
Yeah.
because originally they wanted to just focus on Lucy because
Yeah.
Desi being a foreign person.
Yeah,
And especially a foreign person of Hispanic descent.
yeah,
They didn't want to focus on him. They didn't want to put his name in the title
Right.
of it. So by calling
So they
it
were
I
kind
Love
of-
Lucy,
Right.
that the I is in reference to Desi.
right.
So there's that. There's also the fact that her and Desi ran Desilu Studios.
Yeah,
But
and
do you know-
Desilu also worked with Gene Roddenberry and helped put Star Trek on the ground
it did.
as well.
Because Lucy was a pioneer in one of the things that she was doing. But you know what
Yeah.
happened to Lucy in the 50s?
No.
You ever heard of a guy named McCarthy?
Yes.
And so you know about McCarthyism.
Yes.
For those of you who don't know about McCarthyism, Wikipedia that.
Yeah.
Look it up. Guess who was one of the people that McCarthy went after?
He went after Lucille Ball?
Yes, Desi's response by that by that
Oh, that's
that.
right. I remember hearing about this stuff.
Yes, Desi's response is, "There's nothing red about Lucy, but her hair, and even that's out of a bottle." That was his response.
Yeah.
Yes, she was attacked for being a communist in Hollywood
Because she was essentially pretty much about social equality and social justice.
She was,
Yeah.
and again, that's why she was behind
was the-
something like Star Trek happening.
Yeah, that was the idea of that's it. You see some elements of McCarthyism being currently
Yeah, kind of brought
echoed
back into the
in
forte.
current day politics, which really sucks.
It does.
That aside,
So
shows
that-
like Andy Griffith and that kind of stuff.
Andy Griffith is an interesting outlier, but again, it's still Andy Griffith is an example of small town America not being as stupid as what it's tried to be portrayed as.
Yeah, that's what I was kind
And
of
this
getting
is this is still a very nationalistic show. Which nationalism was was somewhat big at that time. It's anti-war, or it's not anti-war. It's after the war.
Yeah.
So you're getting a lot of nationalism happening.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what you're dealing with Andy Griffith. But anyway, to the point.
Speaking of which, he actually used the term nationalism as opposed to patriotism. There is a difference.
There is a difference between the two. We can.
A lot of people would consider a show like Andy Griffith to be patriotic, but when you look at it, it's essentially nationalism, depending upon the definition, could be patriotism meets propaganda.
I would say patriotism is being proud of your country's accomplishments.
Yeah,
and happy to be a part of your country. Nationalism is more of you believe your country's always right no matter what.
Okay,
that's a better way to kind of
interesting.
And while Andy Griffith definitely did have patriotic main tones for it,
yeah,
there was a little bit of a nationalistic undertone, but again, understandable after the war, people coming home, that kind of a thing.
I don't necessarily consider that to be, especially at the
I wouldn't
time,
say it was a
the
toxic
fact
or
that the
bad
country was, no, it wasn't toxic or
nationalism.
bad. It was. There was, to kind of clarify that, because you hear the term nationalism now,
it's a trigger word.
Negative, it's a negative trigger word. This is something that was necessary at the time.
Yeah, I wouldn't say necessary, but the way it was handled at the time was in a little bit more of an acceptable way.
Okay,
let's put it that way.
Okay, I understand that. Okay, so as far as the forest for the trees kind of idea that you were talking about when it came down to boomers versus millennials
seeing the main message and then not necessarily seeing the subtext as
right
easily.
Okay. Exactly. I'm not necessarily sure that that's the case. I think Gen Xers saw it, but part of Gen X cynicism was that they were catching all that subtext and they were realizing that the conversation was never being had. So I think what's going on is the boomer generation in general, a lot of the time when I have conversations with boomers, they tend to misinterpret the subtext of a conversation.
Yeah, definitely.
Like take into account, like let's go for some groundbreaking stuff here. And I know we've talked about this before. All in the Family as a TV show.
Okay.
Insanely groundbreaking. Star Trek also was of this caliber. The difference was All in the Family used the content. They used offensive content. To address this underlying context of racism and
that's where I think
women's placement in society and all of these things. And you had your moral background characters that were sitting in the show, but the star of the show was the village idiot. That was the point. However, I've had more than one conversation with people that have said, and I was take a look at Archie Bunker.
What generation are these people from?
Boomers.
Okay.
And it's like, take a look at Archie Bunker. I was like, listen to what he used to say. And somebody who talked to me said, oh, yeah, he told it like it was. And I went, no, that's not the purpose. The point of Archie Bunker's context, the reason why Archie Bunker exists as a character is because he is reflecting the ugly mindset of those people that are uneducated in general, that are using their racism as an excuse for their place in society, or even just he was being blatantly open with his opinion, as uneducated as it may be at that time, and that allowed for the conversation on the other side to go, people aren't think about it. Women aren't like that. Why can't women do this? Black people aren't like that. Why can't that happen?
The comparison that I can make, honestly, would be South Park. In that South Park that has all these horrible characters in it that say and do awful things at different points in time.
Yes,
but the point is not that they're saying it true, or it's to try to reflect those segments of society.
Yeah.
And funny note, just the resident boomer from that show, All in the Family, Rob Reiner.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever followed him on anything on social media now.
I have.
That dude is as open-minded and liberal as can possibly be.
Oh yeah, he was a straight reflection of his character.
There is no racist bone in that
Rob
man's
Reiner
body.
being Rob Reiner on that show.
And it's but you're right. That's a perfect example of people see him as no, that's how people talk. That's how people thought. And what they don't realize is the point of the show, the whole level of the show was to try to show you how that's not right. This guy has problems. This guy is not the proper. He's a reflection of society, but he is not the goal of society.
Exactly. Now take that into account.
Yeah.
What a lot of boomers would find, and I say this as the average person who is not paying attention to the deeper meanings, reading between the lines with all of these things, because comedy is a great way to go about actually putting these out. You can't do it. You can do it with a drama, so if you address racism with comedy, you get All in the Family. If you address racism with drama, you get Roots.
Yes.
There's a whole different context, and both of them can be up to a certain degree in your face. The other one is easier to communicate with so many people because it uses jokes. It's a lighthearted way of looking at it. But then when you really take another look at that same episode that aired, it starts to make you think about it. You
see the subtext. You don't just deal with the thing that's right there in front of your face, the instantly recognizable part of it.
Yeah.
You have to see what the real meaning behind it is.
Exactly.
What the subtext, what the various layers that it may look like, again, some racist idiot just spewing stuff. It may look like to kind of combat some of the current things going on. It may remind you of an amusement park ride. But when you look at the subtext, when you look at the other things that are being said, what's happening is they're using the original medium, the first medium, to get your attention and to get you involved.
Yeah.
And they're feeding you this subtext that has a deeper meaning that either you are going to get or you're not.
Right.
But the hope is that by giving you something at first that draws you in, they can feed you this other thought frame that may be really emotional and world changing and make you stop for a moment and think about your life.
Right.
Think about what you're doing, but you weren't expecting it, and it hits you sometimes even harder that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it may take a long time before it does.
Exactly. Now get this. Now, when going down to what I tend to see, what you were talking about, kind of helped put things in perspective to me when we're watching the generational gap happen. And the farthest removed from that generational gap happens to be the boomers in this context. Take a look at it this way, okay? You did obviously have people that were mindful of these situations that were happening, and they understood racial context. Otherwise, you wouldn't have had the war over civil rights and women's rights in a social aspect that were happening at that time.
Yeah.
But the average person who was disconnected from that was watching their favorite television show and getting pissed off at the news for putting out all this negative stuff, and they wanted to get away from that, were getting exposed to these ideas without actually being able to process them. As adults, boomers were watching All in the Family. As kids, Gen Xers were watching All in the Family, and they were starting to understand the subtext.
They got it. They were getting it. They were seeing the change.
They were seeing, get it.
They became the change.
Up to a point, here's the deal.
Yes.
If you notice Gen X and their cynicism, and then you notice millennials and their, I would say, depressed activism, and then Gen Y's straight gung-ho, shut up, you old people, we're going to change this now. Or,
Z.
Gen Z, not Gen Y. Sorry. Millennials are Gen Y.
Yes.
When you see the millennial, I call it depressed activism because what's happened is the Gen Xers are the first generation to basically see within the exposure to the media that the media exposure that they had, that the way that people act may not be very appropriate. They watched Archie Bunker as a child.
Well, and
they saw Archie Bunker everywhere. They saw them in their parents. They're the ones that can admit it easier.
They're the ones that can admit it easier. And this is just a note I want to make.
Yeah.
This is the other problem with boomers is they still have the holdover from previous generations,
right?
Where they don't want to admit that they had all of these things within them. They don't want to admit that Archie Bunker may be a perfect example of who they were at one point in time. They
It's
don't
a
want
possibility.
To admit that
I would say
they don't want because the fact that it has become something that is considered the inappropriate way to act.
Right.
And there's a large number of them that don't want to admit that they were that way. They want to.
That's very possible. That's very
moreover,
possible.
some of them want to cling to the idea that that's just he was talking when they say.
I wasn't necessarily going with that. I'll continue, but yeah, I've got to.
Sorry, I mean I hate to do the break in, but just the idea that when they're saying he's telling it true, he's telling it right, he's saying it. That may be a justification for their own actions that are similar.
Yeah.
That they did in their life before. Maybe they did change, but they don't want to admit that they were maybe that type of person.
Right.
So they try to justify it. But anyway,
Right.
Go on.
Okay, so what I'm seeing in general about how Gen X views the world versus Boomers, a lot of the Boomers are seeing. They're seeing that stuff from when they were essentially a little younger or when they were coming into the more formative years, coming into their 20s, seeing shows like All in the Family and that kind of stuff, and thinking that is the way that real people are. And so they act like that because that's an example of being a good, not necessarily a good person, but being a person, the average person, right?
Yeah, the average
Gen Xers see that. They see what their parents are doing, or what their parents or their older siblings, because we're talking younger Boomers, right?
Their Uncle Joe.
Gen X sees that. They see that it's not the way to act, but they also see they come into Reaganomics and the Bush era, right? Out in this area. So out in the States. So what they see
now we're looking at the economic part, which has a whole other story.
Well, there is, but at the same time, I'm okay. So I'm looking at this. Well, economics does have a role in society.
The economics has a role in the whole baby boomer thing.
Absolutely.
Do you want to diverge?
Very much.
Do you want to diverge yet? Or
not necessarily. No. I want to look at the psychology of each separate generation and how it's starting to evolve and move.
Well, then hold on. Can you hold that thought?
I can try.
Okay. Can you make a note to be able to hold that thought?
Sure. We're going to run long today, aren't we?
Well, a little bit. I do want to mention the fact that part of the economic thing that happens with the baby boomers that actually leads to the psychological stuff, because, and I think I've said this before on the podcast. Anybody that's heard me talk about it, I've said it many times. Part of the interesting thing that happens in America after World War II is we're the only major country involved in World War II that didn't get the crap bombed out of us.
Well, because we were the hell away from everything.
So we have all these factories.
Yeah, not the crap bombed out of us. We had one little tiny island.
One island got bombed.
One small series of islands, and then we turned into a drunk monster.
Nothing else really happened to us.
Yeah.
At least our mainland. So all these factories that were used for wartime production were turned over to produce goods.
Right.
And we had a huge economic boom post-war where other countries, like half of Europe, was just rebuilding.
Spent all their money rebuilding, yeah. So we became the richest country in the world.
Russia rebuilding half of its stuff and trying to rebuild a population where over 20 million people died.
Yeah.
Japan, they had to modernize and rebuild 2 cities that got flattened.
Yeah.
I mean, there was so much rebuilding in all these other areas.
But like just the medical issues and
so many things involved. America was able to have all this manufacturing come up, and so we had a huge economic boom in the post-war years. We also had a 70% tax rate on the richest people in America, which funded a huge number of public works programs, like your highway system, your freeways. Almost every government, even down to the local small city government, job positions, water districts, city councils, all these things that are paid by the government, these were all part of the post-war heavy taxation.
Yeah. Oh, those goods that are being sold out
public works
from
programs
companies to other countries for their rebuilding.
Well, and then
we're using that on our own infrastructure.
And we had these huge amounts of public works programs put into play that didn't exist in this country before that.
Yeah.
So anybody that you know that's had a job in any police department, sheriff's department, any city, county, state facility, these were all a part of this huge post-war boom that happened in this country. And this was something that was so far in the United States, nothing like this economic just growth, huge growth. And the boomers were born into this growth.
Yeah.
They saw this beautiful growth of everything. And their kids, the Gen Xers, were born into the decline because this growth hit a peak. And then like anything in economics that only gets to a certain point, you can only go to a certain point before the market starts to deplete on you.
Right.
And the Gen Xers were born into the depletion of this market.
Okay, yeah.
And
So that does kind of play into what I'm talking about.
That's why I wanted to mention it now.
Yeah.
As you're going to the Reaganomics and what economic places were put in the early 1980s, that was kind of an attempt to respond to the market hitting its top, which it did in the mid 70s,
and starts to taper down,
and it started to drop down. For those people who are boomers listening, the one or two of you, you remember in the mid 70s when the market started to tank on us, when we started to have when this country started to have these huge gas prices, all these different things happening as the market slowly started to fall because it had hit that peak. Boomers were born into that. That shaped them. All they saw was the peak and possible prosperity. This idea of the American dream. This happened in the post-war years as, look at us, we are the most prosperous country on the planet, because they were at the time. They had the capability to. So much technology had been created during World War II. So much had been furthered. And then to be the only country that was involved in that conflict, that have all your stuff intact, you were able just to grow exponentially where the other countries were still trying to catch up in things.
Yep.
As a result, you saw huge growth and then the decline of that growth.
Yeah.
And all the boomers had for their experience was this growing, burgeoning economy where everything was a bright future coming forward. And as it starts to fall, the Gen Xers grow up in this fall, seeing this economy falling apart, and it shapes that cynicism. They see this story of how jobs were plentiful and you could just walk in and get a job somewhere. People were able to make what they needed to in enough to afford housing because housing was available. Cars were available and cheap. Brand new Mustang in 1966 cost like $3,000. I mean, seriously, just the huge number of things that were just so much more open to people during that time. And as the Gen Xers are coming up, they're seeing all this stuff fall apart. They're seeing it all decline.
Right. And that's one thing that does feed into it, and I agree with you on that.
Yeah.
Part of what I was looking at is essentially the societal difference as well. One of the other things that feeds their cynicism is they're seeing the examples of what basically the type of human being that you shouldn't be being heralded, and then at the same time, zero change happening in that in response to it. So they see the examples of how these people in general are, how, racism is still essentially rampant. You have a lot of backlash from groups like the Black Panthers.
The laws come into place eventually.
Yeah.
And all the laws do is make certain things illegal and make other things legal. But
Right.
it doesn't stop your uncle from your drunk uncle at Thanksgiving from doing all these different racial slurs and talking about all these different people.
They see a lot of this happen, but at the same time, they don't see the movements that were called for gay rights, for women's rights, and even for black rights at the time during the 60s when all of this stuff was huge, doesn't really fully kick in until close to the 90s.
I would say,
and you start seeing a resurgence socially. You start seeing it in media. You start seeing it in television. You start seeing female empowerment become a subject. You start seeing minority empowerment becoming a subject, gay rights becoming a subject, but it waits like 30 years. Well, that 30-year span is when the Gen Xers start to grow up. So they see the examples of this stuff not needing to happen. They're learning about this stuff in school. They're learning about Martin Luther King getting shot. They're learning about Gloria Steinem, and they're not seeing the results of it. And so they're like, oh, well, I guess that this isn't going to freaking work, so we might as well, like, basically, we could sit here and have our opinions about what these things are, but nothing's going to change anyway. People are just going to be jerks.
I see.
You know what I mean? So you start seeing this. That I think was a major do you think that Gen X cynicism in general?
Do you think that has a impact on the lack of voters?
Yes.
Okay,
I'm not sure how many Gen Xers vote, but I do know that there are a lot of millennials that don't, because their older siblings and their older siblings, their younger aunts and uncles, maybe their younger parents.
Yeah.
That cynicism on top of the other things that were happening in the 80s, 90s, you've got your,
but
you're looking at things like participation trophies and stuff like that.
This
that
whole
really
idea, though,
gives
that
this
your
false...
voice doesn't mean anything.
And here's the thing, like, what boomers see as a false sense of entitlement is in the millennial generation that they didn't see in the Gen Xers, because the Gen Xers were so beaten down that they weren't even they didn't even have they didn't feel they could even ask for it. Whereas the millennials are taught something completely different. You have the things like, and I know a lot of people blame this.
The millennial teaching is possibly a result of the
millennials,
Gen X experience of it.
Yes, millennials.
They didn't want their kids to deal with the same stresses and the same feelings of helplessness that they did as kids and that they did growing up.
Right. Well, millennials kind of get this, what I'd like to call somewhat of a depressed activism. Their activism is just straight up not participating and listening anymore. It's paying attention to what is happening to them personally as opposed to what's happening in society sometimes. However, that does start to reflect because millennials start to no longer become ashamed of the things that help define their social, I don't want to say position, but maybe they start to communicate about things that help define them, their mental health. Like millennials have very much a concentration on mental health.
Which is a good thing.
It is a good thing. They start to promote mental health more so, whereas boomers weren't even freaking thinking about it. And Gen Xers knew that it existed, but they didn't know how to attack it, to go after
boomers are supposed to not worry about mental health because that's a problem you should just solve on your own.
Well, the philosophy of mind over matter, right?
Or just if somebody's got too much mental problems, just put them in a facility and not deal with them anymore.
Right, exactly. I mean, and that had been going for eons before. So the millennial take on mental health in general, this is the first generation that's really taken a look at it and went, you know what, we should be paying attention to our minds just as much as we're paying attention to our bodies. Stress is what helps cause heart attacks and strokes.
It does.
As much as, and I'm not saying that that's the only factor, but it is one of them.
Well, and I can see as just in the last 14 years, 14 to 17 years.
Yeah.
I'll use that as a good guideline. I can see the differences in I very much see the differences in how people respond to diagnosis of children with special needs.
Yeah.
How schools have changed and responded to the needs of special needs children, the way that they the way that they plan their education, the way that they have things funded for them, the way that they have things set up. There's been a huge in the last 17 years, I can say, huge shift in the way that these things are handled, the way that these things are worked with, and a very child-centric shift. This has become, trying to do the best thing for the child, not make the child the closest thing to quote-unquote normal as possible, but to do the best thing for what the child needs. Try to help the parents do the best for what the child needs. They're not trying to because previously, when you're dealing with special needs individuals, you either tried to get them as normal as possible so that they would work as much as possible in normal...
Get them to function in society,
as much as possible, or you hit them in the attic or the basement or put them in a facility.
Right.
You didn't have... There wasn't really middle ground in that situation.
No, not at all.
Whereas now the focus is much more on let's get the child to the point where they can have the best life that they can going into adulthood. Teach them as many skills as they are able to do, but the point is not we want to try to be as normal as possible. It's let's work towards the child's strength. Let's make sure the child is going to be happy and safe and secure.
Yeah.
And that's I can say on a personal note, that's a really refreshing thing to deal with education. It really is, because it's showing that they have the best interest of the child. And as a parent, my first thought is always the best interest of the children. Not the best interest of the parents. Sorry, your job as a parent is to take care of what your kids need before what you need. That's just the way it works.
Yeah.
If you're not going to do that, don't have kids.
Absolutely.
Sorry, that's a strong opinion of mine, but I'm sticking by that thing. Do what's best for your children. Don't do what's best for you, because unless what's best for you is actually what's best for your children, then
well, yeah, if it matches, right?
But
well, and that's the dedication of being a parent. But that's beside the point.
That's I can see the shift in that with what you're talking about of millennials.
Yeah.
They're becoming while they may be less likely to outwardly be involved.
Right.
They're becoming more understanding.
Yeah.
They're becoming more aware of the things going on. They're becoming more accepting by and large.
Very much, and that's where the intercommunication comes in.
Yeah.
Along with what had been going on with the boom of the internet that happened, and that directly affected the millennial generation in general, where you could communicate these personal things with people that you've never met and realize there's so many more people than just you who thinks these things, because the only example
it gives you a buffer level too.
Yes. The only example that you have in order to try to, like, you can't discuss these personal things with, a lot of the time with your parents, maybe, because they may be brushing them off, or they're thinking you're being a drama queen, or whatever depending on what it is.
Their viewpoint is also going to be rooted in the time that they were born, the time that they lived, the things that were brought onto them. It's very rare that you're going to find anybody just in your regular personal life that can think objectively enough about situations to understand when they have personal bias in a situation, acknowledge the personal bias, and still be able to have discussions about things that are kind of different than what their preconceived notion of the world is.
Right.
And the internet has given the ability to communicate with like-minded people that gives you that chance to understand that while you are unique, you're not alone in your uniqueness.
Exactly.
And you have that ability to be more accepting of it. You don't have to be just another part of the crowd, another face in the crowd. You can celebrate the uniqueness of yourself.
Right, exactly. And do that in a crowd of people that share that same uniqueness too. That's a big deal.
And that's I think I know we're running long. How much more do you got, sir?
I have a little bit. Let me actually sum up what I'm talking about. Well, I'll sum it up. So basically what you're seeing in the exposure of these generations, what they're taught, and the way that their mindsets tend to be, is that the boomers were introduced these concepts as new at the time, right? Racial equality, gender equality, all this kind of stuff, right?
These are concepts they had to come to grips with. They weren't part of their initial life.
This was a new experience
to them.
They were used to they didn't understand that these things even existed. They just like, obviously those that were disenfranchised knew that they existed because that was part of their lives. Yeah. But those in general, the non-disenfranchised majority group didn't know these things exist because they didn't exist in their day-to-day lives. So they were exposed to this, and the first thing you're going to do when you're exposed to something that tells you that the way that the world isn't what you thought it was, you're going to deny it.
Yeah, you're going
to do that because you're going through it. You hit a 7 stages of grief type of situation. Then the Gen Xers are told as children, this is the way the world has been, and they don't see a change yet. The first thing they're going to do is their entire lives they've never seen that change. They're going to think that change may never happen, so they might as well just kind of learn to come to grips with it. Boom, there's your cynicism. The millennials are getting the exposure of the resurgence in the 90s of minority rights, of women's rights, of gay rights. They're seeing this get kicked back out after 30 years of laying dormant, right? Because you had the civil rights movements of the 60s.
Yeah.
And then it kind of laid dormant between the 70s and 80s. There were some things that did happen, a couple of fringe situations, and you kind of started to have
So when the gay rights movement started happening,
when the gay rights movement and the women's rights movement, female independence, and all, it shows like in Living Color that were crazy, groundbreaking for their time. That was a variety show essentially based on black culture. That was huge. That didn't happen in 1981. And you had blaxploitation films happening in the 70s and the early 80s, but you didn't have you didn't have a cultural shift like being able to
No,
take
and in
that
Living
type
Color
of comedy and putting it into network mainstream. It wasn't something that was seen as viable yet.
And I think one of the most amusing things personally about In Living Color is they literally made sure to have a token white guy on the show.
They did.
He ended up being one of the.
They had one white guy. They had one Asian guy.
Yeah, well, he ended up being one of the greatest comedians, at least film comedians of the modern era.
Yeah.
But it's just you know, typically there would be the token black guy and something. No, they had a token white guy.
No, they had the one token white guy,
and it was is kind of hilarious to have that one token white guy.
And all the rest of the cast in that show were all amazing.
It was a great show.
They were fantastic.
It was the show that the I remember the cool edgy people saw that show.
Yeah. Well, and these guys are putting out, like, you had rap acts on there that were the part of the musical variety. Like, you had SNL doing you didn't have Cypress Hill on SNL until you had Run DMC on In Living Color.
Yeah, you had Pearl Jam. You had all these other. You had what's his name from Simon and Garfunkel. He'd be on the show, something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Just to give you an idea for people who think that
we've gone off on the tangent again. I gotta
people who think that again with the civil rights movement and everything was changed.
Yeah.
As a result of the civil rights movement, I know somebody who actually went to live with family, or whose family moved to Oklahoma. In the mid '90s. Mm-hmm. They moved back to Oklahoma because they had other family living there, and this person had been born and raised here in California. Moved back to Oklahoma family moved back to Oklahoma, and this person became friends with, or started to try to become friends with, an African American kid that went to school with them, and came home and told family about it, and their grandfather who was living there, who the family had moved back to live with, said, "No, we're not friends with those people here." This is in the mid-'90s. Admittedly, it's in Oklahoma, insane. But it's in the mid-'90s saying, no, we're not friends with those people
That's
here.
insane. Yeah, and
for the dealing with the idea of the cultural difference from California to out there, to understanding that there was still one side of town that African Americans lived on, one side of town that the white people lived on, and you didn't interact with those people except when you had to at school. For that person having to deal with that cultural shift, because California, it's a very liberal, very open state, but even in the 90s, you still had, and even to this day, I'm sure in the South, you still have those major differences that are just like, I know I could never, you ain't never going to have me live below the Mason-Dixon line, because I'm going to get in a fight. Because I am too open about those type of things to not become angry if I hear anybody disparaging somebody as a result of their race.
Yeah,
I'm going to take offense, because even if it's not happening to me, you're to be a proper human being relating to other human beings, you don't need to be that way.
Yeah.
But, so it still exists, and it still existed in the 90s. But you're right. Some stuff was brought to the forefront at that point.
Yeah. And here's the thing. Millennials were exposed to that culture as children.
Yeah.
So then it became second nature to them to see equal rights in that respect.
I agree with you.
And then from there, you have this, unfortunately, the millennial experience is very double-sided. Like what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You're not necessarily seeing the Gen X cynicism of this situation, but you're watching them.
It's almost a malaise
with,
It's almost a malaise, like a slow, like you described it as a depressive activism.
Yeah,
it's like a malaise that they feel. It's like a slow burn depression where it's just like. Part of the realization that this is supposed to have happened way back in the 60s, and it still hasn't changed. So the change will come, but is it going to come fast enough? Coming slowly.
That's what you kind of see.
Am I doing something, going to do something about it?
Yeah, it affects them very much on a personal level. It affects their outlook in that respect, as opposed to Gen Xers who just came to terms with it's never going to happen. You see the millennials that see, well,
when
it's gonna, but what is it gonna matter when it does?
Yeah.
Is
that's
the question.
Even better. Yes. That's even
now
more
you're seeing Gen Zers.
Okay.
And they're like, we're sick and tired of it not happening. You're telling us that for the last, 40 years, you guys have been sitting here and nitpicking and fighting over this crap. And now you've got kids that are coming right fresh out of high school right now, and they're able to vote. and they're able to speak out, and they're able to do all this stuff in response to all of this infighting that's between 3 generations of people that have not been able to come to any agreement over anything because you have such a polarization on the top, on the oldest end of it, that are still there. And you don't, and this youngest generation doesn't understand why. Why do these people's opinions still matter? Why is it that
the world's no longer theirs, but they think it is?
Yeah, exactly. That's the and again, I'm not necessarily trying to insult anybody of any type of generation. I might be putting out. I know you might be. I'm just putting out the psychological mindset that as I see it, and observing each separate generation and why they think the way that they do. The reason why you see somebody who's in their mid-40s, almost 50s, and they have come to grips with, oh, well, I might as well not pay attention to politics at all because it's all just going to be the same infighting BS that it's always been.
I get that.
You're going to catch that, but then you're going to see a kid who's coming up on 19 years old now, and they're just like, I'm voting. Let's get it done.
That's good.
Right?
At least, but
flip it. Go AOC or whatever. You know what I mean? Like that's you're going to see that. You're going to see that shift.
Personally, I do like AOC, but
I do too.
That's giving away a lot of our political feelings, which we try not to do too much.
Yeah.
But anyway,
but when it comes down to that, like I'm happy as a Xennial to see the shift, and I'm happy for my friends on the millennial spectrum to see that shift finally happen.
And when you're describing both parts of it, the Gen X part and the millennial part, I feel both, which is a perfect example of how the Xennial thing is real, people, because we really do feel the draw of both things. We feel that cynicism, we feel that malaise, and yet at the same time, I don't know, I feel a little bit of honestly, I want to have the Gen Z activism.
Yeah.
But the Gen Xer part of me is like, yeah, but what about what might happen to you as a result? What's it going to do? Is it really going to? Is it going to
make any change to you?
Is it going to make any real?
What are you
going
to have to sit and fight? What are you going to give up this time?
What are you going to have to deal with? What's going to how much are you going to be beaten down by somebody because you're wanting to make a change? That fear of actually saying something, of actually doing something, because
that sounds more millennial to me.
Well, that's why I say we have both.
Yeah.
That's why the Xennial falls into the category of we really feel, I feel a lot of both. I can't say I identify with one or the other.
Being afraid as to what the difference is going to be as opposed to just thinking that it's not going to make one at all. Yeah. Those are two completely different.
But I feel both.
That's crazy. Yeah. I
crazy.
get it. I get that and I understand that.
Anyway.
All right.
Thank you all for listening. Especially boomers. There are a few of you we do actually like. Maybe. But thank you for listening. Hopefully that gives you an explanation. If you have feelings about this okay boomer phrase, if you have feelings about the generational differences, please, again, as always, as we mentioned earlier with the gun stuff, feel free to comment.
Yeah.
Feel free to give opinions. Again, if you are attacking people, we will be deleting things, but it's good to have this dialogue. It's good to understand how our generational differences do make us view the world in a different lens.
Absolutely.
And that just the way we view the world isn't necessarily always right. We need to understand other viewpoints, and also understand that even as we are, and in the age group that we're in and the generation we're in, the younger generations are who this world is for. We will eventually.
You're going to be leaving it to them. You need to put it in the.
We need to keep that in mind.
Yeah,
leave the best world that we can for what they need, not what we want.
Yeah,
but what they need.
Yep.
Anyway, Mike, where can people listen to us?
Well, you can listen to us on the XennialChronicles.com.
That's a website, boomers.
Yep. Or Zencron.com if you don't want to type that much.
That's an easier way to type in the website, boomers.
Speaking of Zencron, you could follow us at Zencron on Twitter and on Facebook.
Those things are web pages that you can go to, boomer. Am I going to do this the whole time?
I don't know. Are you?
Yes.
Oh, God. Okay. You could also check us out on TuneIn, on Spotify, on Google Podcast, and you can type in our URL on Apple Podcasts and follow us there. You can also check us out on YouTube and Facebook. We actually have our entire archive of videos on YouTube. Like, comment, subscribe on YouTube if you can. Like I said, like we both said before, be courteous.
And boomers, if you don't know how to access any of those, ask your millennial or Gen Z grandkids on Thanksgiving. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.
Have a good one.
Thank you for tuning in, friends. The journey continues next week.